She entered the world alone, her first breath marked by her mother's last. There was no celebration, only silence, hushed whispers, and a child wrapped in linen that smelled of death. Raised without affection, she grew up surrounded by relics of the past, cracked portraits, rusting candle holders, and old servants who flinched at her presence. Her name was spoken like a burden, her existence a reminder of loss. Her earliest memories were not of toys or lullabies, but of isolation and cold stone beneath bare feet. By 7, she understood fear without language. She was taught not to speak unless spoken to, not to cry even when in pain. Her caretakers avoided eye contact. Her questions were met with slaps or scripture. She learned early that comfort was not given. It had to be earned, and even then, not always. Dreams began to haunt her, filled with strange chanting, pale women bound in chains, and staircases that led nowhere. When she mentioned them, she was locked in the cellar for days with only bread, water, and the sound of her own breath. She stopped speaking of the dreams, but they never stopped returning. Her 12th birthday was not marked with gifts, but with marriage. The man was nearly twice her age, with empty eyes and a reputation for cruelty that no one dared confront. The marriage was arranged, signed, and sealed with a prayer. What followed was not spoken of in public. Behind closed doors, the girl became a possession. Her body, her will, and her voice were acclaimed. The bruises did not always show on her skin, but they darkened everything inside her. She withdrew deeper into herself. The world had taught her that pain was normal, that silence was survival. But even in the darkest corners of her mind, something endured. She began noticing patterns, how fear made people obedient, how silence could be a weapon. She watched, listened, remembered. No longer the trembling child, she started studying the same systems that had caged her: authority, submission, inheritance. She absorbed it all with quiet precision. When she became pregnant at 13, she did not weep, she did not plead. Instead, she made a choice. If this world would not protect her, she would learn how to manipulate it. The girl who had been stripped of love, of agency, of innocence, began shaping herself into something stronger. Not to escape, but to transform. Pregnancy did not soften her world, it exposed its deepest cracks. At 13, her body bore the weight of expectation, not joy. Her swollen belly was a symbol of duty, not life. The household treated her not as a mother chubby, but as a vessel, valuable only for what she could produce. Pain became constant. Nights were long, filled with breathless gasps, twisted dreams, and the distant sound of church bells mocking her silence. No one asked if she was afraid. No one thought to. A midwife was assigned, old, near, blind, and quiet. She said little, but her presence was different. She placed charms near the windows. She lit tallow candles and whispered to Margaret when others weren't watching. The words were not warnings, they were promises. "You will survive," she said once, but not unchanged. That seed took root. Margaret began to realize survival was not the end, it was the beginning. She wrote when she couldn't sleep, in scraps of parchment hidden beneath floorboards. She recorded what no one would believe her. Girl's grief turned to grit, her body claimed and scarred but never fully broken. She wrote to the child inside her, not of hope, but of purpose. "I will raise you not as I was raised. I will teach you not to bow." Her writing was not poetry, it was strategy. The birth nearly killed her. Days passed in agony. The house waited in tense silence. No physician stayed through the night, and prayers felt hollow. But when the child came alive crying, healthy, she felt a power she had never known. She named him Elias, not after a saint, but a rebel. It was the first choice she had made freely, that mattered more than anything. Something within her shifted. The pain didn't fade, but her response to it changed. She observed how servants whispered when she entered the room. She noticed how her stillness unsettled them. She realized she didn't have to shout to be heard. People feared what they didn't understand, and they didn't understand her anymore. She began to assert herself, subtly refusing food she didn't request, insisting on being present during decisions, questioning rituals that once went unchallenged. She knew her husband watched with suspicion, but she had learned to move beneath notice. With a child in her arms and silence as her shield, she began crafting a new role, not as a wife, but as a woman rising. Her husband's sudden illness drew no tears. Whispers blamed consumption, but Margaret said nothing. She nursed him dutifully, spoke politely, offered him tea laced with nothing but bitterness. As his strength faded, hers grew. When he died, the household mourned cautiously, not for the man but for what his absence would shift. Margaret did not cry. She stood still, listening to the quiet vacuum of power, then stepped into it. Widowhood gave her status, but she sought something deeper: control. She began inviting minds. Society had silenced disgraced scholars, banned theologians, women who'd seen courts from behind veils. They brought books, languages, secrets. Margaret absorbed everything. Power was not brute force, it was knowledge, fear, timing. She watched how men spoke in court, how they disguised threats as pleasantries, and learned how to do it better. She transformed the estate, not with construction, but with rules. She rewarded loyalty with small freedoms. Servants began speaking, her name with caution, then with reverence. Priests noticed changes in her prayer, tone less submissive, more selective. She rewrote the rituals. Lent became strategy. Grief became theater. Rumors circled that she practiced darker arts, that shadows stayed longer in her room than light allowed. She didn't deny them. Fear served her more than truth. She studied bloodlines, inheritance laws, diplomacy. Every dinner guest was a puzzle to solve. Every compliment was weighed. Every glance tracked. She dressed with purpose, black for silence, crimson for warning, gold for intent. The court noticed men twice her age paused when she entered. They didn't know whether to pity or fear her, and that confusion gave her power. Elias was never far from her side. She chose his tutors personally, men who'd failed in war but won in philosophy, women who knew how to listen before they spoke. She taught him to read expressions before words, to wait, to plan. He grew up knowing his mother was not loved by the world, but respected. He was not raised to inherit safety, he was raised to manage danger. Margaret became essential. She advised quietly, but her influence reached decisions others believed they had made alone. Those who challenged her suffered sudden losses, alliances broken, letters leaked, heirs discredited. No one could trace it back to her. That was the brilliance. She didn't need a crown. She made sure the crown needed her. Time carved her features into stone, but it could not touch her mind. Margaret aged with a grace that unsettled those around her. Her estate grew quieter, more sacred, more feared. Walls, once lined with family portraits, now held symbols and maps. Every item had meaning. Nothing was accidental. Those who visited left changed, some more paranoid, others inspired, but none unmarked. She spent her final years in writing and ritual, not memoirs. She refused to let anyone own her story. Her words were coded, stitched into fabrics, carved into the underside of tables, burned into the edges of books. Even in solitude, she played the long game. She understood history, would not write her kindly. It never did for women like her. So she created myths instead. Some would say she spoke to ghosts. Others swore they saw her reflection blink when she was not facing a mirror. She didn't chase truth. She buried it where only the curious would dare dig. Elias became her legacy, a leader forged in silence, polished by intellect. He carried none of her scars visibly, but all of her precision lived in him. He ruled not with rage but with calculation. Where she endured brutality, he wielded restraint. And in that contrast, she succeeded. He never called her a hero. He never needed to. His leadership spoke it for her. Margaret's death was uneventful. No coronation, no crowds, just a closed casket, sealed quickly, and a will that dissolved most of her possessions. Her journals were destroyed by her command, her staff scattered. The house became a relic overnight. Historians debated her influence, many questioning whether she held as much power as legends claimed, but none could explain the reach of her network. The laws amended during her time, or the quiet deaths of her rivals. She became a whisper reduced to cautionary tales and second-hand accounts. Yet, centuries later, in archives and forbidden collections, her name appears with strange frequency, a watermark on revolutions, a footnote beside radical reforms. A presence not erased, only distorted. What survived was not her face, nor her voice, but her impact. A woman shaped by grief, strengthened by cruelty, and sharpened by knowledge. She rewrote power without permission. And while the world moved on, her shadow moved with it silently, deliberately, forever watching.